98% of Americans get reassurance that there are still some Democrats willing to stand up for them. And in our fourth story, even better, House Majority Leader Hoyer now says he and Speaker Pelosi are in absolute agreement on middle-class tax cuts, except for one little detail, whether or not to hold a vote on them. Well, they would if the Senate would, but nothing's definite. Well, they definitely might vote on it, but no, probably not. Hoyer telling reporters today that Democrats are still considering a vote on middle-class tax cuts before the House adjourns Friday. Just don't hold your breath. That's not saying that we're not going to do it. It's saying, I doubt we're going to do it. It's an ever so slight departure from what Hoyer said over the weekend, calling a potential House vote a specious act. After Nancy Pelosi told reporters that the House Dems retain the right to proceed as we choose. Today, Mr. Hoyer said the Dems are united, adding a tax vote will be done before the end of the year. After reporters pressed him on the logic of waiting for a lame duck session, Mr. Hoyer blamed the Senate. Is there any confusion in this room where the Democrats are? Frankly, if we thought we could get it through the Senate, absolutely we would act, and we may well act anyway. If the House does act, it will probably do so under a suspension process, which requires a two-thirds vote. Meantime, CBO Director Doug Elmendorf testifying before the Senate Budget Committee. As the Washington Post's Ezra Klein reports, Elmendorf concludes that extending the Bush tax cuts, quote, will probably reduce income relative to what would otherwise occur in 2020. Elmendorf conceding that tax cuts would just temporarily stimulate the economy, and not by much, and they would create, certainly, more debt. This, as a New York Times editorial, slams the Democrats for their inaction in the tax cut debate. This particular failure, the Times wrote, to act was not about Republican obstructionism, of which there has been plenty. This was about Democrats failing to seize an opportunity to do the right thing, and at the same time draw a sharp distinction between themselves and the Republicans. In an effort to do the right thing, 46 House Dems, led by the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, Raul Grijalva, sending a letter to Speaker Pelosi asking for a vote to extend the current tax cuts on everyone but the top earners. Extending the Bush tax cuts will result in an $830 billion giveaway to the nation's wealthiest Americans, significantly increasing government debt, the interest on which will be paid for by our nation's middle class for years to come. This astronomical sum could instead be used to close our budget deficit. Joining me now, a member of that Progressive Caucus, as well as the House Appropriations Committee, Congressman Shaka Fattah. Congressman, thank you for your time tonight.
It's good to be here, Keith.
Where do things stand right now? Are you and your fellow progressives confident there will be a vote before the recess?
I think there's going to be a vote before the recess, and I think that Democrats believe in total that we're going to lower taxes for people at $250 and below. That's for everyone, for the first $250,000 of income. The question that you pose about whether it's before the election or after the election, obviously I prefer before the election. I think that's what we're going to do. But there's no uncertainty about whether or not we're going to act. In fact, there's only one party that has done tax cuts over the last 2 years for the middle class. We did it in the stimulus. Almost 40% of the stimulus was a reduction in payroll taxes for people under $250. Every Republican voted against it, except for 3 in the Senate. And so if you're looking for which party will vote to reduce taxes on people below $250 and exclude that top 2% for their extra income, it's already been demonstrated, and we're going to probably see another demonstration of it this week.
On the premise of the old, as the old phrase goes, you can't build your reputation on what you're going to do. How can any Democrat say that voting for tax cuts for the middle class before the election would not be a good thing? I mean, isn't the polling pretty clear on that? And what is this interplay with the Senate? Why does whether or not the Senate votes on this before the midterms really matter to anybody in the House, or why should it matter?
Well, you may have noticed that a few Democrats are getting beat up for voting for an energy bill that the other side calls cap and something or another. And the Senate didn't act on it. We have hundreds of bills, over 400 bills passed by the House that are over in the Senate and have not been acted on. So can a member be harmed by casting a vote that they have to take the hit for, right, without the concluding the matter with at least a public policy that they can stand behind? But if the question, again, is tax cuts for people $250 and under, we enacted that in the stimulus. Every Democrat that voted for the stimulus voted for tax cuts for people $250 and under, and every single Republican in the House voted no on it. So if you're looking for a vote to demonstrate that it happened, I think you're going to see another vote this week on the matter. That's what I'm pushing for, and I think that both Leader Hoyer and Speaker Pelosi are clear that we think that for your income up to $250,000, that there should be a continued reduction in taxes, but we should not make the same mistake that was made almost 10 years ago, enacted in the Bush tax cuts, which have driven the economy in part in the hole and has raised the deficit and the debt level of the country.
A question about what Mr. Elmendorf of the Congressional Budget Office testified to today, that making the Bush tax cuts permanent would impede income growth in the long term and also add to the deficit. Is there not an argument to be made that it would be better to let all the tax cuts, even the ones for the middle class, expire because there is not any long-term plan to pay for them?
Absolutely. In fact, if you let all of them expire, you could almost balance the federal budget. The problem is we're still in a recovery that needs to take firmer hold in our economy. So, additional revenues to people who will spend them, that is, people below $250,000, will have a stimulating effect on our economy that the economy needs at this time. So that every economist will tell you that when you're trying to develop this recovery, that we have to be very careful that we don't pull back too soon. So yes, as an empirical matter, we know what the Bush tax cuts will do because they've done it already. That is, we've seen their action over 10 years. That is, you will get a temporary fix, sugar fix almost, and then it will run the economy into the hole. We don't want that. We at least don't want to have it skewed to the top 2% of earners the way it was done. We're talking about an average tax cut of $100,000 for people who are making millions of dollars. There's no reason for it. Our economy and our debt and deficit picture can't withstand it.
Congressman Chaka Fattah of Pennsylvania, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you kindly.
Thank you for having me.